You are good. Take whatever feels like a really good spot for you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the 2022 edition of Expo Chicago, the International Exposition of Contemporary and Modern Art. I'm Kate Sears-Patowski, Director of Programming, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Dialogues, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on current issues that engage them. This afternoon, join us for the panel Textile Artists Now, a wide-ranging discussion with artists and curators who will touch upon topics including the appeal of textile art to audiences and collectors alike, their work's relationship to craft, how knowledge of processes are shared, and the conceptual underpinnings of their practices, as well as how politics are developed through the medium. It is my pleasure to welcome our moderator, Michelle Miller-Fisher, Ronald and Anita L. Wornick, Curator of Contemporary Decorative Arts at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and she will introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, for the lovely introduction and for the invitation to be part of this panel. Thank you so much to everybody at Expo Chicago for having us. We are so delighted to be here. I'm thrilled to be in the company of three really great panelists who I'll introduce briefly now. But who I hope we will get to know better over 45 minutes of discussion and then 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. I followed each of their work for some time now, and I'm both really happy and honored to be in conversation with you. So some very brief bios that in no way expand upon all of your many achievements. Gia Swaby is a Bahamian visual artist whose practice is an exploratory celebration of Blackness and womanhood. Her work centers on Black joy as a radical act of resistance. It works through the philosophy of love as liberation and explores pathways of healing and empowerment. Kimberli Gant is the incoming curator of modern contemporary art at the Brooklyn Museum. Prior to that, she was curator of modern contemporary art at the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia, and she holds a PhD in art history from the University of Texas at Austin. And then last but not least, LJ Roberts is a visual artist and writer who creates large-scale textile installations, embroideries, artist books, and collages. Their work investigates overlaps of queer and trans politics, activism, protest, and craft. LJ also maintains a critical writing practice that bridges craft and queer theory. Their writing can be found in the anthologies, and this one's an excellent one I have on my bookshelf, Extraordinary Craft, Culture, and Contemporary Art, published by Duke, and Craftivism, The Art of Craft and Activism. LJ's work has been shown in exhibitions at the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, amongst others. And I'm housed in the contemporary department at the MFA, where I work with living artists across media, including textiles. So I'm going to give a very brief sort of contextual summary, 2 or 3 minutes just to get us going. Today we're going to be talking about textiles. As the description for this panel suggested, to a casual observer, artists engaging with textiles as their primary medium, be that stitching, embroidery, quilting, weaving, knitting, felting, or other approaches to fiber, are really in the spotlight at the moment with recent exhibitions at major museums celebrating incisive contemporary artists and seminal collectives, including the Gibson quilters, and not least the amazing Bisa Butler exhibition here at the Art Institute of Chicago, curated by a fantastic scholar and also, I will say, a wonderful union organizer, Erica Warren. So we've seen countless, right? Yeah, well done, AIC, on that union. We've seen countless exhibitions of late touch upon textiles, including Fabric of the Nation, exhibition which opened at the MFA in Boston late last year, curated by my fantastic colleague, Jen Swope, as well as installations that celebrate artists working across textiles and fiber arts. And I'm going to use the example from my home institution again, the MFA. Here you see Sheila Hicks, Olga de Amaral, and Ruth Asawa as part of the long-term collection reinstallation Women Take the Floor. But there are many others that you will have seen and that have abounded across the States and beyond. The quilts of G's Bend have been increasingly better known by audiences through a number of exhibitions, including at the Baltimore Museum of Art in 2021 and in New Orleans in 2020. Faith Ringgold's current American People exhibition at the New Museum includes a presentation of her quilt work, and this really reminded me of scholarship that's also abounded at this moment in time around this type of work. And I have to name check the really fantastic Frey, Art and Textile Politics, published in 2017, which seems like a benchmark for this particular conversation by the West Coast professor Julia Bryant-Wilson. And then, last but not least, in this incredibly abridged moment of textiles that I'm sharing through the slides, I was inspired to include the work of an artist, Margaret Bruning, who I spent time with yesterday morning in rural West Virginia, who's undertaking a modern apprenticeship. And so over the last 5 years, she's raised her own sheep. And then after hand shearing her sheep, she takes the wool from its rawest state to the most beautiful woven textiles that you can see below. I actually met Margaret as part of a project that I'm undertaking to go to all 48 states looking at artists, including textile artists, via train this year. And I should let you know, the reason I'm wearing cartoon socks and a jumpsuit is that I've been living out of a backpack on the train for the last 10 days. This is the only outfit that I haven't worn during that time, and I saved it especially for you all. So I did put on deodorant today. The question I'm asking as I go on this trip is, how do you come to the knowledge that underpins your practice as an artist? West Virginia was my 17th state, and Margaret's answer to this question ties back to this panel today. She said it involved matrilineal inheritances, and it really underscored her answer when she was talking about how she came to textiles, how long a history textiles have in so many cultural landscapes. So I'm really interested today, and we all are in the conversations that we've had, in talking about why now for textiles in so many institutions and sort of public recognition moments, but also how long this has been going on and how long it's often been ignored or erased. So it seems like everybody is suddenly noticing it, but there's a much longer history today. So I'm going to ask each of our brilliant panelists to introduce themselves just now in just 2-3 minutes by explaining their stake in the conversation today. They're going to tell us a little bit about the excitement, the urgencies, the ideas that they're particularly interested in, and just introduce you to their practice if you don't know it already. And then we'll kick off with a few more questions. So Kimberli, I have some of your slides up, and I'm wondering if you might start us off.
Sure.
Okay.
Lovely. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. It's lovely to see everyone. I love textiles. When that's one of actually the earliest memories I have in terms of actually becoming interested in the arts. I got to see the Faith Ringgold show at the New Museum, now living in New York again. But I had, growing up, an image of the poster of Tar Beach and another of Faith Ringgold's quilts growing up as a child. So not only did I kind of see those quilts as just a kind of image, but then my mother would often talk about the legacy of her great aunt who was a quilt maker. And recently I was actually able to, sadly when my grandmother passed a few years ago, my grandmother kept those quilts from her aunt, and then my mother, my sister, and myself each got one. So there's a legacy of just knowing about the beauty of just that handmade, breathtaking, exquisite, not just craft, but imagination and power in creating those objects that I see as fine art as well. And I've just joined the Brooklyn Museum 2 months ago, so the images that I have here were the 5 years I was at the Chrysler. I was very inspired a lot by textiles because of just the beauty of just not only the imagery, but also of the actual objects. So the previous image, Fayeg Ahmed, who was an Azerbaijani artist from sculptor trained, but also created these beautiful optical illusions with textiles. His image version, the first piece I acquired for the Chrysler Museum, I was very proud of that. And it was a very bold statement for the institution. They didn't require really textiles. I was like, we've got to expand beyond what we're thinking of painting and sculpture, because it's a part of that. Textile it's just a different medium for that fine art practice. So that's the piece there. Ebony Patterson, an incredible installation artist, works in so many different mediums, followed her work for years. Another incredible artist that we brought into the collection. And I think what I tried to really do was just expand people's understanding of what fine art could be, what it was, what it is, what it always will be, and just because of how we're taught it. So we'll see more of that.
Yeah, and I really want to come back to that idea of expanding what audiences expect and what collection committees expect and what collections can embrace as part of contemporary art making practice. Gio, can I ask you to give a little bit of a stake in the conversation?
Hi, my name is Gio Swaby. I just want to thank everyone for being here with us today, and it's wonderful to see all of your beautiful faces. So I found textiles in my practice because my work is really at the core an exploration of love and an expression of love. And I tried to figure out what was the best way to communicate that. And I thought back on my own life and my own connection to textiles. And I grew up in a house full of thread and fabric because my mother was a seamstress. So she introduced me to sewing really early on in my life, and I was the only one of my siblings that really connected with that practice. And I could see, even as a child, how excited she was to share her life's work with me. So between us, it really became like this communication, this expression of love, moments for us to bond. And later on, when I found myself like creating art and being an artist and working in portraiture, I found that perhaps textiles might be the way to communicate that love for the people that I'm representing and to the people that I want to see reflections in my work. And I guess that's really my stake in this conversation about textiles.
I love that, Gio. And I want to say, LJ, when you're before you tell us a little bit more about your stake, you also, the first time you really came to textiles was when your grandma taught you how to knit when you were really young. And so I want to pause for a second and recognize these are not the art histories I grew up knowing, and I feel so strongly that it is wonderful to be able to start out talking about the matrilineal inheritances that we have, coming to them through joy, sometimes through grief. They're not always easy things to take on from our families because families are complex. But that is an alternate path to an art history around textiles that I think is increasingly being told, increasingly being embraced, but certainly has not usually been canonical because it's found in the domestic, the familial, the gendered, the marginal. And so it's so interesting that your stories, like so many other folks working with fiber arts and textiles, really start in that particular space. But LJ, may I hand it to you?
Sure. I also want to thank you for having me, and thanks for Expo for having me, and also to be in conversation with the both of you is really exciting. And it's hard to follow Gio because I've also realized that my work is about love, which is hard because my baseline is cranky. So it's like, that's been a new thing. But yes, I learned to knit from my maternal grandmother, who was an incredible artist. And she actually learned from her mother, my family is Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe. My great-grandmother immigrated from a small town outside Kyiv in the 1920s and supported the family as a seamstress. So she taught my grandmother, and my grandmother taught me. It skipped my mother, who takes her clothing to get buttons sewn on at the dry cleaners. My cousin really likes that quip. She's in the audience right now. But, so yes, I grew up with it. And then the other big moment for me was seeing the AIDS quilt when I was 16. And I was a teenager in the 90s. When you are having sex ed in 1993 and you are a queer and trans person, it is not cool. Because you're basically like, there's no options, there's no vocabulary, there's no images, nothing makes sense, and everyone that you know who's gay is like associated with HIV and AIDS. So I went to go see the AIDS quilt on a school field trip, and I was the only person that went. And I bought a t-shirt with the Names Project, and I was so scared that I would just wear it in my dorm room without anyone seeing it, but it was my first piece of queer ephemera. And from there, I was actually an English major in college, and it's interesting to talk about Faith Ringgold because I actually came to Faith Ringgold through Michelle Wallace, who was her daughter, and reading Invisibility Blues because I was an English major and studying critical literary theory. And then I figured out that everything I was studying in English, and I was also into poetry, and that comes through a lot in my work, was embedded in the materiality of textiles. So I could basically be a writer and use textiles to emphasize that writing through its materiality. So that was kind of the kind of grounds that I grew up on.
And I was reading, actually, LJ, if we're okay to share this story, that that connection between textiles and text. I had not heard the term banner drop before reading your biography, but you unfurled a very specific piece of text at the University of Vermont as an undergrad.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, I started my art career illegally climbing buildings and sneaking out ladders. But like I said, I didn't grow up with like a whole lot of any kind of queer trans vocabulary images. So, to come out to my parents, why not hang a giant pink triangle off the tallest building of Vermont that says "Mom knows now that you've knit"? And then I also got back at CCA for dropping the word crafts by knitting the word crafts and putting it back up there the day of open studios at 6 a.m. And the story goes is that I didn't know they were filming the promotional video for the school the next day, so they were unhappy. But now that piece is actually in the Oakland Museum of California now, so you can go see it.
So those are some pretty fantastic stakes, and I'm really glad that we're in conversation. I wanted to turn to Gio and LJ and then Kimberli to you. So the first question for the two artists on the panel. So the premise of the panel is that we're having a moment in textiles right now in contemporary art, and we can debate the truth of that claim in a minute. But first, though, what does it look like to start getting attention in this moment as an artist that works with textiles? And LJ, specifically, you've had a long studio practice and have taught, but you said you hadn't been close to the market or had a gallerist. I know you're right in the middle of finishing studies right now as well, Gio. So could you talk a little bit about what it is like to get attention for your work in this moment in time, and both the really wonderful parts of that and the things that you have to be really careful and scrutinize and be intentional about? And maybe, Gio, we could start with you.
Like you said, there's a lot of duality around the feelings I have about the new attention. I mean, it is incredible to be recognized for the work that I'm doing. I feel that I have, kept my practice really honest. Like, I've been really honest with myself about the kind of work that I want to make, and I've pursued that, and I've been really intentional about staying true to that vision of representing a core and my primary audience, thinking about Black women and girls. So it's incredible to have this opportunity to connect. When your work is seen by more people, you have more opportunities to connect with people, to have this experience of seeing of having Black women and girls enter the spaces where your work is, and to see themselves reflected. It's just incredible. But there's also a lot of responsibility for me as an artist, working in portraiture, representing people. It's a huge undertaking to be a Black woman and wanting to be in charge of telling our own stories, but I'm still speaking about the lived experiences that are connected to me but are not always my own. So I'm thinking of the responsibility of that, and then also, where will the work end up? Or where is it shown? I have to think about the colonial histories of the institutions where my work is shown and housed, and what that means in connection with the work. I guess I am just grateful. Sometimes people refer to it as like a burden of having to the kind of practice that I have that's, political in nature, being a Black woman representing other Black women, but I feel like I think of it more as like an honor to be able to do this work, and to be able to do it honestly, and to create space where perhaps there was none. And I'm approaching this whole structure as really an outsider. I didn't really find art until a little bit. I didn't grow up going to museums and galleries. I didn't go to my first museum until I was in my 20s. So I remember what it's like not to be a part of that world, and I create my work around that understanding. How can I make it more approachable? How can I make it more accessible? How can I make it so that it's able to reach this primary audience that I am really thinking of when I'm creating this work?
I also love with textiles and fiber arts in the broadest sense that in its best iterations, it really doesn't exist in museums anyway, or it does. Maybe there are great collections, but it doesn't have to only exist there. And indeed, it is something that can be accessed in many places. I also think of the way that you both actually talk about love in your practice, and Gio, you talk about your works being love letters to Black women and girls, and that is correspondence that is precious and tender. And as you say, the types of exchange that you have to be intentional and careful about how it is framed, who it is framed by, and where it is presented. LJ, maybe you could speak a little bit to the question of what it's like to be working in textiles at this particular moment versus the long trajectory that you both have had working in this medium.
Yeah, Gio, I really liked what you said about being honest with the work and like keeping honest. I think about that a lot because I also feel like I've been given a great privilege in terms of the platform I have and the issues that I speak about, and I try to think about the most responsible practices to do that. So I've had a studio practice for about exactly 20 years, I would say. And I actually feel like I've been really fortunate in those 20 years. I actually feel like museums and institutions have been very good to me. I'm always a little surprised when people approach me and say that I have a lack of visibility, because I actually feel like I have a lot. Which is, it's like a perception thing where I'm like, am I seeing myself wrong? And this current moment is incredibly complex because we're seeing a lot of institutions having to kind of clean up after themselves, and that's really messy. I didn't also grow up going to a lot of museums. Actually, the first time I ever saw contemporary art was the Sensation Show at the Brooklyn Museum. And then I ended up showing there 20 years later in the same place, which was pretty incredible. So, yeah, I mean, I had a really big year in 2021. I joined a gallery, Hales, who has been amazing, and they brought my work here. This is my first art fair. Which is also to say that I never thought I would have a gallery. Like, I never thought I'd have a gallery. And I grew up with, like, the Gorilla Girls in my face, so I was like, this is never happening for me. And I'm definitely not Hales' first unicorn, not by a long shot. And I really like that about them, just to put that out there. Like, I'm not their first unicorn. So that's good. I think textiles have always been around. They've always been in museums. It's just like there's this moment where I think people need them because we're all traumatized, obviously, from a bazillion things that have happened for many, many years and recent things. And there's like an approachability that happens within institutions that makes things that are maybe difficult to talk about a little bit more approachable. We're all around textiles all the time. So, yeah.
So then, Kimberli, I want you teed me up really nicely, LJ. I wanted to ask you about the institutional perspective here, and I have some thoughts about this too, because we both are at institutional settings. So the Brooklyn Museum, really nice collection of fashion and textiles. You're in the modern contemporary department, so you're working with living or recently living artists across all medium and genre. Yeah. How is this moment made sustainable? How can folks in our roles or in institutions make this moment sustainable for artists working in textile and fiber arts? What are the kinds of ethical questions we ask? And also, going back to some of the slides that you had earlier, is it an easier thing now to propose textiles to a collections committee than it was 5 or 10 years ago? Or is it just a different conversation? And if so, how?
Yeah, so I think I have a couple ways to answer that question. I think in terms of, as everyone said, textiles are having a moment, but it's like everything, it's the cycle. So textiles have always had a moment. Thinking about, I think that the shift has been textiles were always in existence, collections in museums, and maybe they had quilts, but it was as a historical kind of record, as an archive of a particular moment in time, domestic spaces. But I think especially with works, with the kind of more explosion, I think with G's Ben, people are realizing, but I can also consider them things that I could buy to have at my home, not as these kind of precious objects that kind of are passed down through the family, and that artists go through so many different mediums. And I think now we're also thinking about, artists can mix mediums, they have been mixing mediums, and we can consider that as a part of, not just framed in a particular manner, but it's like, it's a part of this contemporary art practice. And so I think once institutions have had these particular shows, then the visitors are able to go, or feel that they're able to go, okay, this is something that I can also collect. Even if people have already been collecting it, but it's been, sadly, I think, more of a permission to also say, it's not just these, again, family objects that are in my closet that I hold. They're not necessarily sentimental, but they're also things it's kind of like similar with prints. Like, I think these are objects that people think about as, or they're taught to be lesser than painting and sculpture because of the way art schools get taught, the way that institutions present things, when it's paper, when it's textiles, when it's not the kind of big flashiness, was like major installations, they're considered not as important, not as valued. Yep. Which we're all going, that's bullshit, to be perfectly honest. Amen. Because it's great. I mean, just the time and energy of just putting these objects together, whether it's paper, whether it's craft. I mean, it takes so much power in the sense of just like time and energy and resources. And people are getting the opportunity to really recognize that wholeheartedly more than they do. So I think to your question about how do we sustain it, we sustain it by acquiring it. We sustain it by presenting it. We sustain it by talking about it. And also by presenting it not as we're going to do an exhibition on textiles. We put the textiles in the American galleries. We put the textiles in the Asian galleries. We put the textiles in contemporary galleries. You put everything out, all the media. Yeah. Everything is valued. Yeah. So then people go, I got to value everything as well.
And amen. I love that, Kimberly. Yes, 1,000 times. It was recorded, so it can be played back again to the people who need the evangelizing. And I think that is one of the delights of living in a contemporary department like we do. Mm-hmm. I just say I work with living artists. Bring me all your media. I'm just looking for people who are making really good things. And that is, everything, and including textiles and fiber arts. You mentioned a 5-letter word there, which is sort of a 4-letter word sometimes in some circles, which is craft, which I always have to say craft, because otherwise nobody understands what I'm saying with a British accent, which is a bummer for a curator who actually works as a curator of craft. I always have to repeat it. But I'm wondering how each of you connects to that term. I mean, LJ, your writing has been in craft anthologies. I think of Richard Sennett, the philosopher who wrote The Craftsman in 2008, and he talks about craft being something done by hand at a human scale and done well for its own sake. So craft can be anything to do with the media that we traditionally associate with craft, fiber, clay, metal, but it can also be parenting, it can be community organizing, it can be coding if it's done well. And so I'm wondering, is there a relationship between your everyday practices and craft? Is it one that you find that you embrace and you bring in? Is it one that you find can be a barrier when you're going into certain situations? It's quite a loaded term, and I'm interested to know, and if you don't have a relationship with it, that's totally fine, but is it something that you have a relationship with, and if so, what is that relationship? And LJ, I'm going to look at you first, maybe, because you have written on this.
I love craft because it's messy, illegitimate, and illegible. And if you think about craft, like this is what I studied in grad school, it is messy as hell, and people are scared of that. If you think about when you say craft, like the way I learned about it is it's like a screen, right? And you can sift things through it. And craft is so messy that it has so many different meanings that it's like everything comes through and people don't know what to do with this like big pile. For me, as like a queer and trans person walking around, I'm extremely illegitimate and illegible. So there's like something about that that really lines up for me, for better, for worse. And there's like this way of shape-shifting that I really like where, I mean, I just find like the margins the most meaningful places also. So I never want to be in the center, and I always want to take, if I'm ever at the center, I'm always like dropping out the center. And craft has the great potential to do that, but really it's about this fact that it can't be pinned down, and I think people always want to pin it down. They're like, we want to define this thing, and I want to do the opposite.
Well, you are in the center and you can't leave until we finish this analogy. But I remember I was reading about a crit that you had. I can't remember whether it was an undergraduate or graduate work, and you brought something in, and a peer of yours said, ugh, this is craft, and it was a slight. And then your professor said, oh, but craft, let me tell you, like this is the history of politics, of marginalization, of feminization, or gendered. And it was just this rich vein to mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that happened in undergraduate. I went to the University of Vermont. Which has no arts funding, and it has a great art department, which is also a really great place to make craft because you use what's at hand and you figure it out. You learn how to be really resourceful. But yeah, that did happen in a crit, and my amazing professor, Kathleen Schneider, went into this. I mean, that's what happened. I was an English major, and she said, here's everything that's embedded in this. It's like, you know, amateur, race, like, gender, sexuality, labor, all of these things I was interested in talking about in literature. And then I knitted a couple scarves together that said keep warm and put it on the floor, and this person dismissed it. But for me, that was the moment of, this is how I want to write.
Yeah. Gio, how about you? Is craft a term that you use often in relationship to your work, or is it something that you feel close to?
I think LJ said something that I really connected with about kind of defining the space of definition, which is what happens a lot with my work. People sometimes don't know how to approach it because they don't really know how to classify it, which I like. People refer to it as all different kinds of things, including craft. And sometimes that, you know, can be difficult when so much of our world is based around definition and categorization. But sometimes it can be really beautiful and offer like multiple points of entry into the work for people who are seeing it from different perspectives. I don't really shy away from that history of like craft that's often really ingrained or associated with like what we historically think of as women's work and these practices of domesticity that are considered crafts like quilting and embroidery. I want to honor that history through my work because, those are the people that I learned my techniques from. My mother as a seamstress, and then another quilter, Jan Elliott, later on when I was doing a residency. So I think it kind of also has that duality where it can sometimes work for you and sometimes, it can work against you. But I'm in that space of moving toward what works for me. And also thinking about, like you said, like craft as this practice of using what you have around. And I think that's so much about being Bahamian. My partner and I talk about it a lot. And the phrase that a lot of Bahamians say is, you got to do what you got to do. If you don't have access to something and you want to be an artist, you want to make something, use what you have around. And I think, craft offers the space to do that. And that's really how I kind of came into my process as an artist and how I got to know art making.
Thank you both for such generous answers. I love what you have to say, and also love that, we're hearing about these matrilineal histories, these familial histories, craft, this messiness. And again, that's not what I typically get to talk about at an art fair or within arts histories, and so it's really refreshing. Kimberli, did you want to speak to the craft proposition, or?
Well, I'll just say that I think as an art historian, I consider craft to be the idea that I'm learning from those who came before me. There is the idea of the craft, like the craft of what you do, whether it is being, working in the idea of art craft, or also anything is a craft. It is a practice. It is something that is learned and trained and passed on. So as an art historian, I am learning the craft of art history. I'm learning the craft of writing about art history, about doing exhibitions. And so I'm learning by seeing what others have done before me and seeing what I liked, what I didn't like, what worked, what didn't work. And I also think what I'm also trying to learn better to become a better curator. I was actually at this seminar this past week for printmaking, and we actually spoke with an artist yesterday who did printmaking and textile design. But the thing I learned that I've always felt that art historians should know better, and programs I feel like should do more, is actually teach us the craft of art, of the studio practice that we don't know. Like I don't know all the terms of printmaking. I don't know all the terms that are in terms of textile design. I can appreciate it and I see it, but I rely on the artist a lot to give me that information. And I feel that to be the best I can be, I need to learn at least a glimpse of their craft, just so I feel as if I have a better understanding of all the labor and conceptualization that they're doing to get to a final product, just so I can better interpret that and understand it for others. So I think that that's another way to think about it.
It's a really beautiful way, and I wish actually there was more provision in undergraduate and graduate programs in craft history and art history to come into contact with artists, understand processes, conservation as well, so that you can be a bridge between artists and coming into collections and making sure that things can last the way they're meant to last, or that artists know the materials or can have questions about materials answered, actually, so they can inform their practices. We are almost at the point in time where we will ask the audience if they have any questions. But since we have two artists on the stage and we have some of your work behind us, and I'm going to keep on going through, so we'll see both your work, LJ, and yours, Gio. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the process of portraiture in your work. Gio, you touched upon it a tiny little bit. You have in many interviews that I've read of yours, LJ, as well. And I wanted to ask you about how you engage your sitters, what the importance is for you in terms of representing them in the media that you choose. And actually, as I was reflecting on this question last night, I was thinking a little bit about, both the joy and the love, but also the process of grief and that kind of tension between those two things that I see in your work. And maybe you'll tell me that that's not true. But I think of looking at the AIDS quilt as a very pivotal moment for you, LJ, and it's both a grief-laden object, and also this was a moment of you being able to really kind of find a place and find a connection and find a community. I think about the ways in which you talk about your portrait sitters, Gio, and the kind of the ways in which there was a lovely quote that you talked about being loved, and being loved in return allows you to feel both sides of the sun. And there's something so beautiful in that, but super poignant. I think about the ways in which textiles are often the last things we have from somebody who passes. I know your mom passed recently, so did mine. When I went up into her attic, actually, I found tons of knitted baby clothes. None of my siblings have children yet, but she'd put away a veritable grandmother's trousseau for us, and we've kept those. And I think textiles, clothing, garments, these ways of connecting really help us show love. But there's a flip side to that too. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that through your portraiture and that tension.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm getting really emotional thinking about it.
Take your time if you need.
Yeah, so for me, certainly my work has been, you really touched on it. It has been this experience of joy and grief side by side. I in the last 5 years.
So you can take your time. Shall I ask LJ first? Yeah, go for it. And if you need a hug, there's three of us here ready to pounce on you, Gio, and we will. But, LJ, go for it.
I know our work is about love. It's so weird for me to say that. For me, portraiture is actually a double-edged sword for me, and partially it's because I grew up seeing no images of queer and trans people. Some of the first images I saw were Catherine Opie's images. So representation is important. Like, I want to see queer and trans people all over the place, and now there's a lot more of that in recent years. But when you don't grow up with people that look like that, it's a really, really big deal. On the other hand, representation means excluding people. When you make portraits, I just had a show that was 26 embroidered portraits made over the course of 10 years of friends, lovers, collaborators, and many people in my community. Most of my friends I've met through an organization called Visual AIDS, which archives the work of artists who've passed away from AIDS and supports artists who are living with HIV. And there's a huge surrounding community, and it's my heart. Like that, I'm about to cry too, because it is my heart. And so representing that community is, like you said, it's a really big responsibility, especially for a epidemic that has been so impactful on my life, on my friends' lives. Through COVID, it's been very intense, being very entrenched in the community of people living with HIV. I think that, so the representation is really important. Like, seeing those people is incredibly important. On the other hand, when I walk around, like, bodies are stereotyped. There's like a calcification that happens. There's, this assumption of like what queer and trans bodies look like. And part of what I want to do as a queer and trans person is have no assumptions made about what my body is like, or what my gender is like, and what my sexuality is like, or any parts of my identity, frankly, for that matter. So does portraiture work against that? And that's why, I don't know if they're in the slides or not.
Yeah.
But
Here we go.
so that's a Zoe Leonard piece. But I think there's a picture, that's Frederick Weston, who's an incredible artist that everyone should look up, who passed away in 2020. Tuesday Smiley, also an incredible textile artist. That's my collaborator, Chris, who works with HIV positive men. There's a picture of like the back and the front of the installation. There we go. So I show my portraits this way, where they're framed in glass. So this is the front and that is the back. So the portraits are abstract and they're representational. And that's not a binary. They're interdependent and they're one thing. So to have that abstraction and to understand that abstraction and representation are not two different things, but they're interdependent on it, and that is as much as portraiture as a figure is very important to me. And that's how I want to approach people, is that like I see your body and I know that that's a very small part of what a portrait is. So you can like flip the frame to see the front and the back, but really even saying it's the front and the back. My friend Fred, who's in one of those portraits, was like, you should show the abstraction as the other way. Like, you should see the abstraction first and then the figure. That's way smarter, and he's right. And the book is around there, and maybe I should have done the book. The book is actually in the bookshop. We did a book, but you also flip the page and you see the front and then you see the back. So I think about that a lot with portraiture. Yeah.
Thank you. So you're all my new best friends. You saw me cry. We're connected. I'll first talk about, because you are now touching on something that I also explore in my work of the front and the back. I do it in a bit of a different way. So in my stitched portraits like this one, the line work that you see is actually the underside. It's reversed, absolutely. I worked initially in creating portraits and just seeing the front side, exhibiting the front side, but I always had this like strong inclination and interest in the back. For me, you get to see a bit more of the journey of the creation of the work. You see like some of the tangles, some of the unpredictabilities that we see when we are sewing and stitching and that are often hidden. So there is a process of revealing that happens when you show that side. It's an exploration of vulnerability, which is a theme I'm really working through in my work, like this balance of strength alongside softness and how we find it. And then back to your initial question about this exploration of grief and joy that go hand in hand, especially, I think about my practice and I've had a lot of recent experience with loss, losing both of my parents over the last 5 years. And I use my practice as an exploration of healing, as a way to find joy when you are experiencing such grief. And for me, through that process of kind of experiencing this loss, I started to recognize and really think about my life. Well, what was the most important things to me? And I recognized I wasn't really prioritizing that. The people are the most important, the relationships that we have, the love that we have for one another and that we share. So my practice really kind of shifted toward that. I draw inspiration from an Indigenous scholar and artist, Dylan Miner, who says that the work is in the visiting. And these physical works that are created are like a residue of that work of connection that's already been done. So for me, the work is in this process of like photographing the person I'm representing, engaging in conversation with them, connecting with them. Most of the people are my family and friends, so we already have this like history of a relationship and these moments of love that we have kind of created together. And then this interview process kind of takes that to a place that's more intentional. Tell me about you and I'll tell you about me. So the physical works that are created after are like a dedication to that person, a tribute to the love we have for one another, and to this process of connecting.
Gio and LJ, thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like that was a moment of visiting together, which I'm really grateful that you shared. And it's important, having gone through some grief of my own over the last 5 years, I feel like there's a really interesting friction in the ways in which grief can be very liberatory in so many ways. It can very much focus things, but it always stays with you, right? So it's something that you are taking everywhere that you're going, which comes back actually to what I think about with your work, LJ, and this sort of portability, which you talk about a lot with your work, being able to carry it everywhere, being able to work on it constantly. I'm looking at the clock, and I know that people are going to have questions for you all, and so we are only 2 minutes past when we were meant to start for a Q&A, so we're doing really well. But I want to open up to the audience. I certainly have more questions that I can ask you all, but I open up to anybody who has questions for any of these amazing folks on the stage. So you just have to raise your hand. Somebody will bring you a microphone. Jamie just here will bring you a microphone. And I'll wait for a minute to see if there is a question. And if not, I will ask another one.
Oh, there's a...
Okay, fantastic.
I was really intrigued with your liking both sides, and I think we could all sing a chorus of Joni Mitchell's I Look at Life from Both Sides Now. And the doing of the work, the manifestation of it, is that relationship you have to the people. And in the basis of craft versus art was a real big thing in the 70s that you may have missed because you weren't alive yet. But in Texas, craft came from the designer craftsman. The fiber emerged from that. And I am picking up in Chicago, it comes from Textile because of the Merchandise Mart and the Textile Department of the Art Institute. And so I don't see fine art as being above those, but being within that, because without the making of the materials, you're not going to have art unless it's just an idea. But I push for being fiber art because back in the 70s, craft sold, the market for craft was so much lesser. And so I think our challenge is to find our market that sees us as artists and I think we deserve as much as those $100,000, $1 million paintings, and we need the museums and the magazines to help people realize the value of our work. And I think for both of you, you really stand out in this art expo, and I hope that you can be leaders in doing that.
Thank you so much. Amen to that. I think there's a lot to unpack there as well. I feel like the 70s, in many ways, at least for studio craft, were a real boom moment. And there was like the ACC, there was Craft Horizons, there was a new museum, which is now MAD, but it was the Museum of Contemporary Craft. There's Alien Osborne Webb. There were collectors that were feted and encouraged, and that's what became the craft collection that I look after today. Conversely, there has never been the same market in many ways for art that is labeled craft, or making that is creative processes that are labeled craft. So it's interesting, and I think what we've all been talking about today is that is changing. I think there is a different sort of atmosphere in the air, and I am interested to see where it goes, because I'm not sure we know yet, but it's definitely not what it was even 3 to 5, but certainly 10 years ago. Any other questions? We're getting close to the end of the panel. I'm going to ask a question, if not, but if you want to wave your hands. I just want to, there's one in the, fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for noticing, Gio.
Hi. It was really moving to hear all of you in different ways talk about those who have come before you and craft as a process of learning from whether it's family members or other kinds of practitioners. And I'm wondering what you hope, what kind of inspiration you hope those that follow you will take from your practices.
It's a great question. Thank you.
I think a lot about, what I might leave behind, like what might be my legacy. And I think in this, I feel like I've been incredibly lucky in this, pretty early success that I've had. And one of the main things I think about is like, how can I reach back? I don't want to walk down this path and have it close right behind me. I want to think about like, how do I continue this work? I have 7 nieces and nephews, almost 8, and I guess I consider them the most in when I think about that too, because I hope that, for them, I can be the person maybe that I really didn't always have. Like they are introduced to the arts so much earlier than I was, and they have the opportunity to now explore themselves in that way, which has been like such a freeing process for me, even though I found it a little bit later. So my niece recently wrote a short essay. She's in grade 6 and said that I was her favorite artist. And thank you. Especially at that age when they're like,
That is the kind of art history I want to read. That is great. Yeah.
This is the most important. These are the most important moments to me, and to me that was like one of the biggest highlights of my career so far.
I love that. I mean, I'm going through all 48 states right now on the train, and the question I'm asking everybody I go visit is, who is the teacher that brought you to your practice? And it is never a professor that is mentioned first. It is a mom or a sister or a family member. It is a neighbor or a church member. High school art teachers should get a massive shout out because it's often a high school art teacher. But yeah, the ethos, the things that you have around you at that very early age, so many artists I'm listening to, and it's this wonderful moments of visiting with each of them. They can remember being 2, 3, 4, 5 years old and being handed some clay, something, watching somebody mending something within a very close purview, not always domestic, but certainly within the wider community. And that really shapes people's lives. It really shapes their ability to have a creative life, however they pursue that creative life as they go on through the years. LJ, how about you?
I mean, for me, art has been the lifeline. It's been like, this keeps me alive, pretty much, in the world. and in a very literal way. As hard as that is to say, it's true, because when you're ascribed no value growing up in the 90s as like a queer or trans person, because like you're not going to get married or reproduce or like be able to hold a job or whatever that is, I was like, okay, the value is in the fact that I'm creative. But though I didn't understand that until I started reading literature by people like Toni Morrison, Dorothy Allison, June Jordan, like that, I was like, okay, this is, people have a voice, a political voice, a creative voice. And then I found, Grand Fury, Fierce Pussy, all of these amazing affinity groups. And I was like, they're keeping each other alive through community and dialogue and protest and art. I get so many queer and trans kids contacting me. I was telling my cousins today, I was like, someone drops off a teenager a year with me. And I'm like, in my studio, like someone will drop off a teenager in my studio who is like a trans mask adolescent who is interested in art. And they're sitting with me in my studio and we just hang out. That's like particularly important right now with all the legislation that's going through that's harming trans kids and youth so much, and even older people. So for me, if that's what my art can do, which it does, like I said, I get like children dropped off with me all the time in my studio, which is totally fine. And I like hanging out. But yeah, for me, it was a lifeline, and I think it's still that. So that's where I'm like noticing the impact at the moment.
Thank you, LJ. And I want to ask you, Kimberli, what is the legacy that you hope people are taking on? Because, people took note when you were hired by the Brooklyn Museum. It means a lot to a lot of people.
I mean, it's a couple of things. I think I want, one thing I didn't ever mention was I got through my dissertation through my aunt. I had great professors, but my aunt was the only family member who knew what it was like to try and finish a PhD. And she was the one who like emotionally and mentally helped me finish. And so I don't have nieces and nephews yet, but I want to also be that person for people, just another person they can go like, hey, this is hard. The situation of if you want to be in academia, be in art history, that it's okay. I remember when I told my parents, I'm going to major in art history, Mom and Dad. That was not the answer they wanted. That was not something they agreed to when they paid for college. And so, but I did it, and ultimately they just wanted me to be able to have a living and to be able to, to know that I could survive. But I want people to go like, that's okay, and there's people who will help you through that, and even if it's just giving you advice. I want to also leave a legacy of that, that art is important. I mean, we're here, like we know that art is important, like we get it. We're speaking to the choir here, but how many of us know people who just who don't think that it's important, they don't think it's a way just to kind of have a lifeline, have another way of just thinking. We all know the arts are always cut, and I'm not saying that nothing else, reading, writing, arithmetic, very, very important too, but so is just a creative outlet just to live and just to kind of get your ideas out in other ways. And that, supporting artists, I think, is important. Whether you're a finance person, whether you're an art person, whatever, that art can also, you don't have to be an expert in it to also just enjoy it, to participate in it, and to support other artists, ultimately. So those are the things I think I want to, and that it doesn't we don't take it so seriously, maybe a little bit. Like art should be fun too.
Be really fun.
Yeah, and I think it's like we're here and we're talking like with very serious ideas, but, I got to make paper this week. That was so fucking awesome. It was just just the making of things reminds you of why you do it. Like there's fun and joy in it. Like let's remember that too. So
Studio dance parties are
Yes.
absolutely
Amen.
necessary.
This week I got to yesterday morning, I was in a field of sheep feeding them salt licks. It was great. It really reminded me. I raised sheep as a teenager back in Scotland, so it was like coming home a little bit. But yeah, we get to do wonderful things. I'm so grateful to you. We're coming to the end here, and I just want to say we've traversed a lot. You all have given just such beautiful, I'm going to come back to the word you used, honest, really loving answers, really tender answers. It's a generous gift to give to an audience of folks that you don't know, and so I'm really grateful that you allowed that. And you talked about these relational histories as art histories, which I really love. And I think that both maybe explains why textiles are having a moment, which is really a cycle, which is really they've always been here, because they chart our lives in so many different ways. They are a foundational creative expression, but just a part of our material culture, wherever our culture comes from and wherever it takes us to. So I'm deeply honored and grateful to have been on a panel with you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone gathered. Thanks to Expo.